California State University Channel Islands is a student-centered university with a commitment to high-impact teaching practices and experiential learning. This presentation is brought to you by Student Research at CSU Channel Islands. In this short presentation, we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of going to a conference. It's a little bit more confusing than you might think. First, why do we attend conferences? Well, first, to expose others to your work. The thing we don't talk about very often is that research is really a community-oriented activity. We may do our work in relative isolation. However, it's all about sharing with the community so that we can all get a better sense of what's happening in our discipline. We also get exposed to others' work. This kind of cross-pollination, where we find people who are doing similar things, or maybe things that are quite different, but that have implications for our own work, that's where the real vibrancy of a conference comes from. Also, to network. You might be looking for a job. You might be looking to go to graduate school. Conferences provide a good opportunity to network with other people with similar interests and perhaps find a new opportunity. And finally, this is my favorite, exploring new places. Conferences are held all over the country and all over the world in places that maybe sometimes we would never have had an opportunity to go. Those places have unique restaurants, they have unique histories, they have unique museums. We can take advantage of all these things. So it's sort of a working tourism. So let's talk about the steps to conferencing. In this video, we're going to go over finding a conference, submitting a proposal, registering, and you're going to get some tips about presentation. So the first thing you have to do is find a conference. There are quite a few undergraduate interdisciplinary conferences. We have our campus conference that we run every year. There's the Southern California Conferences on Undergraduate Research. There's NCUR, the National Council on Undergraduate Research, and other conferences that will pop up from time to time that take in undergraduates of all different disciplines. In addition, there are discipline-specific conferences. For instance, in sociology, they will have a large national conference and they'll have also regional conferences. Most of the larger disciplines have regional organizations in at least the north, south, east, and west of the country. Many of these discipline-specific conferences have opportunities for undergraduates to present their work in poster sessions, and sometimes will welcome undergraduates onto oral presentation panels. After you've identified an appropriate conference, the next thing you're going to have to do is submit a proposal. So you ensure that your presentation is appropriate at that conference. Keep in mind that presentation space is finite. That is, we only have so many rooms for oral presentations. We only have so many square feet to set up posters. And usually there's going to be competition for that space. So what you need to do in your proposal is make the case for your research. Convince the person who's organizing the conference that they need to see your work there. And the way that you do that is by putting in as compelling and complete a proposal as you can, keeping in mind that most proposals, maybe they want 250 to 500 words. So in those 250 to 500 words, you want to be clear, complete, and persuasive. You're persuading them to find room for your work at their conference. So that means if you have a particularly unique point of view that you're going to bring, some unique data, some unique findings, you're going to want to play that up because that's what's going to convince the organizers that you should be there. Keep in mind, however, that the proposal is not a blood oath. If you show up at the conference with something that is different than what you proposed, there's not a cop running around arresting people for not living up to their proposal. You're doing your best to try to explain what you hope you're going to do when this conference finally comes around. The last thing to consider in submitting a proposal is whether you want to do an oral presentation or a poster. For researchers who are perhaps going to a first or second conference, a poster may be the best way to go. Oral presentations take more time and effort, and you really need to practice a lot. Most people are not really good at standing up in front of others and giving a talk off the hoof. You're going to have to practice, and it may be a bigger investment than you want to make early on. The next step is registering for the conference. If your proposal's been accepted, that does not mean that you have been registered. Registration is a discrete step in this process. When you get your acceptance, read the details carefully and find out when, where, how, and by what day you're going to have to register for the conference. Do not assume that they're going to do this for you. They will not, and many conferences will drop people who have not registered by the date that they indicate. So observe those deadlines. Pay attention to detail. Read that email a couple of times. Follow the rules, and you won't find yourself getting into trouble on this step. In most cases, registration is non-refundable, so be sure that this is a conference you're going to go to, or you could be out anywhere from $25 to $250. Now it's time to finish your paper and presentation. The one piece of advice that I can give you that is tried and true is practice, practice, practice. Giving a presentation, whether it's an oral presentation or a poster presentation, is not an easy thing to do. Practice, practice, practice. Pay attention to detail, whether it's a poster or a bunch of PowerPoint slides. Make sure that there are not sloppy errors. Sloppy errors reflect on the person who's giving the presentation. When I see sloppy errors, I assume that the person giving the presentation just doesn't care. Be sure to use professional language and formatting in your presentation. This is not a time to use casual language. And be sure to use appropriate graphics. Graphics are great. Graphics get people thinking. There's an old saying that a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, that's why we use graphics. For many conferences, you'll need to submit some sort of a final product. If you're giving a presentation at one of the larger regional or national conferences, they're probably going to want you to submit your paper so that it will be available to other conference goers and maybe even people all over the internet. Sometimes they don't ask for any kind of submission. Be sure to check your registration details to make sure what it is that the conference organizers want from you in terms of your final product. Practice your presentation. You know your work. Be confident. You know your work probably better than anybody else in that room. That should make you confident. When you give a presentation, whether it's an oral presentation or you're standing in front of a poster with 90 seconds to tell people what your work is all about, remember that you're telling a story. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. In the beginning is what motivated you. In the middle are your methods and your findings. When it comes to discussing methods and findings, people are more interested in findings than they are in method. So tell them how you did what you did, but get into the findings because that's really the meat of the presentation. If you're giving an oral presentation, don't give handouts at the beginning of the talk, and best case, don't give handouts at all. They tend to be distracting for the people who are watching the presentation. They're focusing on the handout rather than focusing on what you're saying. And avoid jargon. Jargon simply gets in the way of communication. We don't all use the same words to describe things, so find out where that common ground is in understanding when you're using your presentation skills. Here are some quick tips for delivering your presentation. Know where your room is for your talk ahead of time. There's nothing more stressful than running around a huge hotel trying to find your room, and it's 3 minutes until your presentation's going to happen. Find the room the day before if you can, or a few hours ahead of time, so that you know exactly where you're going. Don't assume that there's going to be internet access. Yeah, it seems like every place we go these days there's internet, but in some of these larger hotels, they're sometimes not set up to deal with that. Or the internet goes down. What are you going to do? Well, have your work on a flash drive. Take your own laptop computer and have it saved there too. Make sure that you're going to have access to whatever it is that you need in case the internet is not working. And then when it comes to things like questions and answers, first of all, have a notepad and pen ready so that you can take down notes and remember what people have said after you leave the conference. Spend a lot of time anticipating what the questions might be. Nobody knows your work better than you do. You know where the weaknesses and the holes are, so anticipate that other people are going to see where those are and be ready to answer their questions. You can help your cause here sometimes by preparing extra slides that you can go to when the question is asked. So if you anticipate a particular question, you will be able to flip to a slide that says, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and here's what I did to deal with the issue that you've just brought up. So these are slides that aren't part of your formal presentation, but you keep them at the end so you can flip to them if you need them. And if you get a question that you can't answer, there are several things that you can do. One is to say, that's an excellent question. Thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't thought about it that way. Sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know. You don't want to say it all the time, but you can say it once in a while. And the last piece of advice here is that question can be an opportunity for discussion. Maybe that's somebody you want to go up to afterward and say, could we have a talk about the question that you've asked? It's really interesting, and I'd like to get your take on what a more appropriate answer might be. So that's an opportunity to network without having to just walk up to somebody cold and shake their hand and introduce yourself. The steps to conferencing are many. The rewards of conferencing are many. Make sure that you take care at each step in the process, and it will be a much less stressful experience for you. This presentation was brought to you by Student Research at CSU Channel Islands.